Welcome to the Seattle Investors Club podcast with Julie Clark and Joe Bauer, where we share the nuts and bolts of real estate investing from our 20-plus years in the industry. Sit back, relax, listen, and immediately take action. Are you ready? Here we go.
Welcome to another edition of the Seattle Investors Club podcast, where we talk about the nuts and bolts of real estate investing. My name is Joe Bauer, and I have my co-host Julie Clark on the show today. Julie, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. Thanks, Joe. I'm sure you're doing better than me because you're getting ready to kick off. What is it? What are we talking, a year-long road trip?
Holy smokes. Yep, something like that. But who knows what's going to happen? I'm packing up the van right now.
Nice. That's kind of how we roll on these podcasts. Who knows what's going to happen? We never know where the conversation's going to go. But I sure am excited about today's conversation. Who we have with us today, Joe? Kick it off.
Well, today we have the lender and investor, Albert Bui. So, Albert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, we love to have you on the show. Just crushing it, pretty much. Yeah. Thanks.
We were, Albert was just driving previous to us hitting the record button here. So we told him he better pull over. So what were we going to call it? What was that? The most dangerous podcast ever?
Yeah. Most dangerous podcasting. Name. Yeah.
I still might label it that. We'll see. Get us some extra views maybe.
That's right. Awesome.
Cool. Well, Albert, we'd love to hear more about you. So if you could take a second and tell us about your background, how you got involved in real estate investing, and what you do.
Yeah, I went to school down in LA area for computer science originally, Cal Poly Pomona. I'm from the Orange County area, went to college there, and thought I was going to be a computer scientist, engineer, write code and everything. I just got a little enchanted with the corporate job at the time. I was working with a cell phone company doing sales and was making more than what my targeted income was as an engineer. So I figured, shoot, if this is what I'm supposed to get a job in, I'm already making double what I'm supposed to be making as a sales phone rep, then this is probably not what I want to do. If I'm going to school to make money, of course. And I had that one purple book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I knew I wanted to do real estate, but I didn't know how I was going to get into it. I ended up helping out a lady with a five-liner, a new line at a phone store. And what she mentioned was she was a loan officer, and I should come over and would teach me the ropes, and I could work for her for free. At the time, I just wanted information. So I decided to go and on my off time and just go there and learn how to originate mortgages. But I knew I always wanted to invest. So I figured, shoot, I have to learn the debt side of it to figure out how to invest. So that was the reason I got into it. Little did I know you could actually make pretty good money living in it. So I've been lending ever since, but the focus was always to learn how to invest while making a living. So that's how I slowly moved into the niche of helping investors. I would go to local RIAs in the area, anywhere from Southern Orange County all the way up to LA, all the way out to Pasadena and Riverside, Inland Empire areas. I bought my first rental in Tacoma in about 2013 and been buying ever since. So currently at 25 doors, and that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome. I love the fact that you said that you wanted to get into real estate by learning the debt side as kind of your intro into it. I think that is why you, as far as I'm concerned, are one of the smartest guys that I ever, watch. We are all on these groups and these threads, and we all network with each other. But I find myself keenly like a laser when I can tell when somebody knows what they're doing. And that's pretty much what I've done, is laser myself over here to Albert, because even just that comment there is I think, unusual about learning the debt side as a way to get into real estate. People jump into real estate, they know nothing. They don't, the debt side is something that they, I think about later, and they'd be a lot smarter, I think, doing it how you do it, which is understanding all that first, because it allows you to kind of find deals or understand how to do creative deals that nobody else is going to understand, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, it's helped a lot. I mean, every loan I've ever done, even from down payment assistance, first time buyers, all the way up to complicated people with multiple companies and lots of property. And I've always thought about, if I was this borrower, this investor, maybe first time buyer, how would I buy this to keep my risk low? Or if I would, to convert my first home into a rental, how do I keep my risk low, like keeping it below the rent so I could always cash flow if I had to leave the house? So every time I advise the client, it would always be from that frame. I would make it applicable to their scenario. If they're a first-time buyer or if they're an investor, I would say you might not want to cash out so much because, when you go to rent this house out, you're going to be negative cash flow. What are you going to do? That's an example.
Right. Exactly. So you've so you think that you're going to plan to keep the day job? Is that your plan long term, and just layer all the investing on top, which is called passive, I guess, right? That's the point.
Yeah. I mean, it's as passive as it can be, right?
Right. Exactly.
I don't really consider it a day job just because it's more like self-employment in that there really is no 9 to 5 hours, say. So I continue to be a lender. I enjoy it. I learn a lot because I'm on conference calls like this with accountants, attorneys sometimes. So I don't have to pay the $250, $400 an hour, but I can learn all free advice and I get to comment on the lending end. I enjoy it.
Sounds good. How do you find deals for your own portfolio?
I've had good success. I mean, obviously with brokers, but contacting the property management companies that have or tend to have, I would say, I guess the best way you could say is they manage the more slummy properties or they don't do as well. I like those property management companies just because they generally have leads for distressed properties.
Right. Are there any rules on? Are there rules on being would you be considered a mortgage broker, or is that the right term or not?
Right now, I'm a mortgage loan officer lender since I work with a company called American Funding. But
are there rules
in essence, I've always, go ahead.
Are there rules on, let's say somebody comes to you that's a landlord that wants to get rid of their property, but they're deciding whether they want to refinance or sell it? Do you have, are there rules on you as because of your fiduciary or whatever, that are you able to buy their property if they wanted to sell it?
Not that I know of. I mean, there's a distressed homeowner thing with Washington State.
Right.
That's only from a soliciting point of view, right?
Right. I mean, might need to insert, a third party there, like a broker in the transaction, but seems like it might be a good source of lead,
Yeah. If somebody's deciding, they don't want property anymore and could offer that opportunity. I've never had that opportunity, although I would definitely be very interested. I heard the numbers make sense.
Hey, Joe, I'm getting a little bumpy sound over on my side of things. Are you hearing everything clear over on your side?
Yeah, sounds pretty good.
Okay. I was going to say, sorry, guys, just a little admin check-in there. I'm over out here by the water, and sometimes like seaplanes come by and give me a little zap on my connection. But, some of the greatest lead generators, or I would think they would be great lead generators, are, I know a guy that owns a carpet company, and he gets a ton of deals off just, going into homes because he's a carpet guy. Or how about a roofer? I mean, I think, Joe, we talked about one time maybe partnering up with a roofing company as a business. So almost like helping so that roofer could market, and we'd have an opportunity maybe on those deals as part owner of that company. I always think about interesting things like that. You gotta do things differently these days. Of course, all legally. We like to play by the rules at Seattle Investors Club for sure, because I sure like to sleep at night without worrying about anything. But all kinds of deals where people are employed in different ways or have different avenues, and sometimes I wonder if they think about how awesome it could be to tap into those things. I think they forget about that sometimes, but awesome. So this is something I was thinking of asking you. I thought might be interesting because you're such a smart guy and you're in touch with everything. How about real estate or tech startups in real estate? Are there any ones that you have your eye on or that you've heard about that might be either disruptive that you think might actually work for the real estate industry, or even disrupt lending?
Probably lending. That comes to mind. There's a lot of platforms that tie these monotonous tasks together. There's CRMs out there like Blend is one of them that come to mind. Roostify. What else? Flowify is one of them. That's one I use. And they make the lending atmosphere more like what you would consider, I guess the catchphrase nowadays is rocket mortgage. So they make it a more streamlined experience where the borrower can upload everything and basically handle it all automated in the background, and each department talks to each other, because I'm sure anyone that's ever done a loan knows a lot of people don't talk. The left hand doesn't talk to the right hand when you're doing mortgages, and one department doesn't know what's going on in the other department oftentimes. And these new softwares, what they do is they allow everyone to be on the same page, the borrower, all the staff, and the loan officer and the company. And I think that's going to make a big shift, and it allows the small guy to compete with the big guys. So
right.
That's why I've got my eye on.
So are those software like almost, I don't want to call it like a CRM. Again, I'll say I'm not the tech brain here on our team, but are those things that any lender can use, or are those actual companies that would compete?
Yeah, any lender can pay them their monthly and use them. So it would allow the little guys to compete with people with huge workforces.
Awesome.
In essence.
Good stuff. What is, have you heard of Loftium?
I heard of that. Yes, I actually have on a podcast.
To do
I don't
with,
know which one.
Like if you Airbnb out one of your rooms, they'll give you down payment money. I don't know if anybody else has heard about
that's what
them.
I've heard. Yeah. It was it sounded like a middleman kind of, or an intermediary. Right.
I always think these all sound good. They almost sound like fads. I don't know. I haven't checked up on that one lately, but should be interesting to see what happens here over the next few years for sure, with the game totally changing. I think it's gonna look different, in the next 2 years is my prediction. But so let's get into investing a little bit more. So what do you invest in yourself, and what's your criteria for your investments? And do you have any rules that you stick to on your investing?
I've mostly stuck to the 1 to 4 units, mostly fourplexes. I like the ones that are distressed that I could add some value to by rehabbing it, or changing the type of tenant base, perhaps, so that I can get a higher rent. Charging back some utilities. So I do all the things we do to increase the income and decrease the expenses. Yep. I kind of fell into the 1 to 4 just because I knew the debt side of it. So I had a 100% grasp on what it would take. So I didn't have as much fear going into it. But I do plan to go into larger 5+ apartments now that I feel like I've gotten a grasp on the 1 to 4. So that's what I currently do. In terms of rules, I generally want the rents to be about 1.25% of the cost. And the cost to me would be the price you're paying for it plus the rehab. So if it's $300,000 and the rehab is $400 or $100, then I would like the gross rents to be $5,000 a month, or 1.25% of that $400,000 total. That would be an example.
And what's your reasoning behind that? That's your like a benchmark calculation that you do as a quick check as you see deals? What does that end up? Do you have like does that
like what
calculate out for you as some sort of certain IRR or something like that you're trying to hit? Is that just an easy calculation out for you?
Right. There's certain metrics on it that make it desirable. I mean, it comes out to about an 8 or 9 cap. So that's the minimum in general. And when I look at my expenses, I'm looking at completely not being involved. So property management, repairs, utilities, property tax, insurance, everything in there. I find that some people, they do their measurements, but they're managing the property, so their numbers sound better. But in reality, that may be fine if they want to manage it. I just prefer not to. With all the loan conditions and dealing with the lending end, I just don't want to be involved. After I purchase and rehab it, I usually hand it off. So I'm not involved.
And when you say 8 to 9 cap, are you talking about 8 to 9 cap on your actual numbers or your stabilized numbers?
Right. On your actuals, yeah. So if we were to compress that cap to the actual market, the value would be much higher, of course. And another reason I do that is if we do those numbers and we work them backwards, usually you're in the property for 75% of the market value or less, generally, if you do the numbers like that.
Right.
So that means I could go to a bank and get all of my original money back out. That's the reason for that formula.
Oh, so that's your end goal, is to be able to do a cash out or just like get all your money back out. How about cash out? Do you try for cash out, or do you just try and get all your...
I do cash out. Sometimes I don't need the money, so I'll just get a line of credit. But the whole premise is, if I were to get a cash out, can I still cash flow? And those numbers make it possible to still cash flow while you're taking most or all of your money back out.
I imagine those deals are harder and harder to come by at this time. Is that
right?
Right?
Yeah.
Do you do any out-of-state investing at all? Any out-of-state investing?
So it's, I am looking at other states as well. Definitely not my home state, California. Nothing there really cash flows unless if you're in the valley or something.
Whoa, hey. Buddy is with us today.
What was that?
That's Buddy the dog.
Oh, Buddy. Okay.
He is a guest on the podcast from time to time. So
Buddy is our sidekick. That is
nice.
For sure. And he just got his haircut yesterday, so he's all beautiful. Our little boy that looks like a girl. It's okay.
Grooving.
Yeah. So I everybody's got different criteria in investing, of course. That pretty much is covers it for you on, I think people get confused when they're talking about cap rates and this and that, because, people don't know, are you talking about a cap rate on the actual numbers that exist today or a cap rate on the stabilized numbers? I mean, there's so many different ways to calculate.
Yeah. Did you want me to explain that?
Sure.
Yeah. So when I mean cap on my costs. So, I guess the bankers would call it yield to cost. Some of the banks like to call it yield to debt or yield to a debt yield, meaning like your net income with all expenses divided by your loan amount, because they're trying to figure out how much income do you have coming relative to how much payment going out, what their risk is. There's different calculations on it. I like to keep it simple. That's why I use these rules. I mean, I could do the complicated calcs, but it takes a lot of time on each deal to do it. So I like to have a rule of thumb make up for properties so I can quickly gauge where I'm at.
Right. On big, like institutional level deals on commercial real estate, those guys calculate how they decide whether it's a good deal or not, as they also use yield on cost. So that applies. The way that you're describing it is also the way, like I said, even big institutional investors who build 250, 350 unit apartment buildings consider how to, if it's a deal or not, is yield on cost. So definitely something people want to learn about. And and all that sort of thing. So on our podcast
Yeah.
here, we have people that are more experienced. We have people that are listening that are less experienced. And for those that are just getting started, what do you suggest is maybe a good way, the best way for an investor to get started? Is it maybe a house hack, jumping into a flip type of situation?
I think house hack is probably the best, to be honest, because of assuming it's a cosmetic rehab or less, so they can kind of learn the ropes of working with contractors while it's a smaller dollar figure, because those flips and rehabs, it's kind of like you're jumping in the deep end of the pool. They could be a very large rehab, and sometimes a lot of these buyers are buying it at auction. They don't even know what the house condition is in. So I think that's pretty risky. Learning
Agreed.
it from the house hacking point of view, they're getting income to pay for the mortgage. They're learning it slowly while they, do their job or whatnot. Yeah.
So give us the scenario. So somebody picks up a house, let's even say, at auction or however they get it. Do they take that down immediately with a conventional loan because they're going to live in it? How long do they have to live in it to get the best loan rates? And what type of loan would that be?
There's a couple options if they're doing it that way. House hack with a standard purchase, they could use a conventional loan with as low as 5% down on up to $4. This particular program does not requires actually that they own no other property at the time. So it's a great first loan program when you own no other properties to start real estate investing. You can live in one of your 4 units or 3 units or 2 and rent out the rest. You can also use FHA for it, but there are pros and cons of each program. They're both pretty low. FHA is 3.5% down. The conventional program is 5% down. But the conventional program, if you have really good credit, you could get very little to no mortgage insurance if you structure the loan correctly. But the downside with FHA is the mortgage insurance is really expensive. So if you don't qualify for the conventional, at least you always got the FHA option to live in and rent out the other units. Right.
And so that's an interesting, topic. One of the things I talk about at Seattle Investors Club is we did a presentation on which lane are you in, right? And to decide, are you brand new where you don't have, where you got to borrow hard money, you're not a general contractor, you don't have a real estate license, you don't have a contractor crew ready to go. I mean, that's kind of the starter lane. Maybe a lane up from then is you have one of those tools in your toolbox, where maybe you are a contractor or maybe you are a real estate agent to give you a little ability to have some cost savings. I would think the same thing goes. And the point of that presentation was to point out to people, you might be here, but you want to work your way into the next lane so you ultimately get in the fast lane, is I guess what was the point of that presentation. And I think maybe I'm just talking off the top of my head, making this up as I go, but seems like as a borrower, right? So yeah, you're an investor and what do you have in your investor toolbox, but you're also a borrower most likely. And so I would think that you have sort of a borrower's toolbox. You start out in the starter lane, which would be what? Either FHA or some type of, if you have good credit, you get the conventional, and then beyond that, you bump into faster lanes that have better loan terms and better rates. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yes. You bring up a great point, Julie, I think, because in the beginning, I used a lot of private and hard money, which was a lot more expensive with the rates and the points. It was contrary to what I was brought up, with no debt, don't take debt out. So it's really scary to use it the first time, but after you use it for a while, you're like, wow, I captured a bunch of equity. I bought a property that was undervalued and I fixed it up and I refinanced it out. But after you do your first one, you get kind of desensitized to it. But then you realize that you don't want to be paying these 10 or 12% and multiple points day to day. So what my strategy was,
there.
yeah. You get
You
lazy,
could get
right?
lazy there and think hard money's the way to go and not educate yourself about the better, ways to borrow money. I mean, once you know what you're doing on the rehab flip or, the side of actually the construction or understanding, the best way to roll with your property management. I mean, I think the number one thing that you can do, that you should do, is become an expert at the different lending options. In fact, I'll go back to what you said in the very beginning, is you started off being the expert in the different lending options and in backing into it that way, Just, I think things are backwards these days, how investors are taught. They're taught to, be wholesalers and then flip houses and then, use hard money and then slowly work your way towards being, getting into passive income. Actually, it is my mission, Brother Albert, and hopefully you're with me on this, to let's you and me and Joe and Buddy's in on this. Let's flip the coin upside down together, I think, and with our other friends here in our local community. And let's start telling people, hey, you know what? Instead of starting off as a wholesaler and a flipper from day one, you should always look to be a passive investor, because there are ways for you to do that from the start. From the start, right? And
you bring up a good point, Julie. I've always been a great fan of, I think it's the saying is, you start with the end in mind. I think it's one of those phrases from the Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's how I've always done my investing. I had a borrower that changed the course of my lending career. I mean, investing career technically, but it was a lending scenario. And everyone declined him because they immediately looked at his tax return and he showed a zero income. And I'm thinking, oh God, this is one of those decline loans I got to win over the realtor with. But when I looked through his tax returns, the guy owned probably 40 to 45 fourplexes leveraged and probably 4 to 5 apartment buildings that were 40 to 70 units. And what I learned from that was that you can use paper loss to make it look like you have a pass or a complete loss on your tax return.
Right.
Most loan officers would look at that and think, there's no income here. It's negative. But I looked further and was able to add back all the depreciation. And the guy actually made probably $400,000 a month off all these units he had, his entire portfolio. And I was able to get him qualified. I mean, getting a loan, great. The whole point was the knowledge or seeing that scenario tax-wise was more valuable than the commission times maybe 100. So that was one of those scenarios that changed the course. I knew I was doing apartments after that for sure.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I think that people, they need to be taught from the beginning the different lanes of borrowing, like we said, right? So you're starting here and you're in the starter lane. This is what you can do when you're in the starter lane. And here's the lane next to it that you want to try to switch into as fast as possible, almost like a roadmap, how to work your way up the borrowing chain, because all the opportunities and things that open up to you as you go, I think that people are taught to earn the fees off your, flipping is ordinary income and it's just fees. I mean, it's the kind of like, to me, almost having a day job. I mean, it's the worst taxable situation. And yes, you need to be able to, the question is, how much money do you need? Maybe we'll back it up. This is the next question. How much money do you need to, on a typical, let's say a duplex, how much money do you need for equity on a duplex, and how do you go about getting that equity? Can you, I know it's all going to be just, maybe if you can throw out an example, if that's possible.
Sure.
People have an idea. And I think rather, they're looking at all these leads, and if they're doing their own off-market marketing, I think they're passing by opportunities to pick up rental properties, even if they're just single family rentals, because they don't understand the debt side of it. And they're just so focused on flipping. Every flipper, every rehabber that I've talked to, especially, it is like coming out of the woodwork this year. It is the hot topic, wants to be getting into cash flow investing and passive investing. And everybody is regretting that they flipped all those houses that they didn't
Yeah.
keep some of those, or,
So true.
everybody is talking about it. So what
Yeah.
does somebody need to get started from day one? Let's say you're brand new and you're listening to this
I think,
podcast and you're clued in today that you need to look at passive income from the very, very start.
I think it begins with philosophy. You have to have an investing philosophy of why you're getting into this. I think a lot of people, and it happens in lending too. There's a lot of career lenders that are there and they say they've been doing it for 30 years. I'm like, well, I'm thinking if you're making that kind of money and you're doing it for 30 years, there must be something wrong, or they have no goal in mind. So it has to do with, I think, the why you're doing it. If we're getting deep on the philosophy side of the investing, like if you're looking for passive income to free you from your job, or what are you trying to do it for? If you're flipping, are you doing it because you love designing properties and you like to stage them and look good, or is it the thrill, or is it money, or there's an end goal? I think that is the most important part of it. Julie?
I agree 100%. And you might end up with a combo of things that you're doing to reach those goals, right? Obviously.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was passive income to fill out the months where I'm not doing as much loans, so I could get maybe 1 or 2 loans worth of commission in terms of cash flow. And so those months, if I had clients I didn't have any, or let's say, then I didn't have to work. I could just do loans because I purely enjoy, or because I want to learn different scenarios. So I'll take on difficult files for the heck of it.
Right.
That's why I wanted to have the freedom to do it, I guess is the best way to say it.
Exactly. So again, we're started with the philosophy. First, you need to decide what your personal goals are, your why, and then layer that on top of, well, what do you actually like to do? What part of the process do you like? And let's get you towards being able to spend more time doing that. But regardless of who likes what, you still got to be able to pay your bills, right? So there's usually a path to getting there that you build the path, you carve out that path so you can reach the top of the mountain there. And so what else do people need to know about getting started for multifamily investing, passive investing from the start on, how much money does it take, I guess is the question. Do you think? I mean, it depends, of course, where you're located. Equity wise.
You're right. Yeah, I suppose it depends on if we're talking about a person who has a fully involved job or role or self-employment where they cannot get away from it. They've got a bunch of money and they can passively invest into a syndication where somebody else is sponsoring the deal and operating the deal. Then they could do it passively with chunks of money invested that way. I mean, if they're trying to house hack, if they've got limited money, then it'd be better to house hack and live in a multi-unit or even a single family where they can rent out all the rooms or do something creative. Because I've heard a lot of these cities are passing some or being looser about building accessory dwelling units and in-law units in the back. So that's another way to do it too. So you don't have to necessarily have a duplex or fourplex, although that would be great to do it. Yeah.
Totally. I agree. The whole ADU play and stuff like that is, I mean, it's no secret already here in Seattle, but definitely.
Yeah.
Let me back it up a little bit further and say, so for people who are new and don't understand what's going on, how much does a borrower's income and their credit score, how important is that in the loan types, like as they're getting started investing? I think people, I think they get confused. I think they think, well, I don't have a lot of income and my credit is, okay, but not stellar. So I can't do any passive investing. Is that a fact or a myth?
To a certain degree, it's a myth, but there are hardline numbers you need to reach in terms of credit score. Most of the loans are around 620 FICO or higher. I mean, of course, there are lower programs as well, but they're usually for primary residents. Or they have much higher rates. So there is the ability to use the less favorable rates or programs to at least get yourself some loan to invest. However, it's not the ideal scenario. And ideally, you'd want to keep your credit or improve your credit so that you have as many options as you can have when you enter a deal. You could either live there and rent it out. You could buy it with hard money. You can use conventional lenders like myself to acquire the property. It's good to know all the types of money, even if it's local bank community money, or private money with family or other associates. It's just good to know which options you have in the toolbox to figure out. Some days you don't need the hammer. Some days you want to use the flathead screwdriver or whatnot.
Right.
That's my best example.
Right. Exactly. A toolbox of debt as well as a toolbox of, investor skill sets. So I'm going to ask it a different way. If somebody comes across a duplex or a triplex, right, and that property pencils as far as, it has the right debt service coverage ratio and all that kind of stuff. When we're looking back then at the borrower, it still needs to be considered then what their debt to income ratio is. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
At least on the residential lending end. If you go to the local portfolio lenders.
Well, residential, let's qualify for people who are listening, is anything from 1 to 4 units, right?
Correct. My definition from a lender point of view is 1 to 4 units, but in the general lending end, they will use debt to income. So in essence, that will be your total expense per month divided by your before tax income. And it's a ratio. Generally, the banks only want to lend up to 45 to 55% of your before tax. What I always tell clients is the best way to think of that is for every dollar you make before tax, the bank will lend about 45 cents to about 55 cents. In terms of payment, maximum payment you can take per month. So they have a general idea of where they're going to be at. That gives them an idea of that. But other banks, such as portfolio or local community or credit union commercial departments, not the residential department, may lend on 1 to 4 unit as well, but they're lending commercially to your LLC or maybe to you personally, but it's a rental. So the use affects type of money, even though it's still 1 to 4 unit lending. They use debt coverage, which is the more commercial formula. So they don't use debt to income. But it's important to note that if you're trying to borrow each type of money, it's good to know the type of criteria they're judging you on so that you can actually tripare before you apply and get the most favorable results.
So if you were to line up side by side a triplex with I'll say a residential type loan, we'll call it, is that called conventional, versus a portfolio loan, what would be the differences if you take the same property between the two? Would it be how you're qualified, rates,
yes,
loan terms?
Right.
How does that work?
The residential, meaning the conventional and the FHA type programs, focus more on the borrower as opposed to the commercial or portfolio programs, even though it's still 1 to 4 unit. I don't want people to get lost on that track. It's focusing more on the income of the property and then the borrower second. So the property is 80% of it. The property's got a cash flow based on debt coverage. That is the total net operating income divided by the total mortgage payment. And as long as the income coming in after expenses is 1.25 times the expense, then they're cool with it. So that's a way to break down the numbers from a banking perspective.
Are we saying though but are the rates higher on that, going that route?
In terms of rates, right now, I would say they're lower. Commercially, they're lower than residential because residential they're based on different metrics. The residential loans are based on bonds on Wall Street. The Fannie Mae sells bonds that are issued, a 3-year bond, and the rates from those bonds affect residential rates. However, commercial, they're looking at the short-term money, and they're based off indexes, so they're more of a short-term. Without getting too complicated or into the weeds, right now you have an opportunity to get commercial money a little cheaper, actually. And There are pros and cons to each, though, so we can also go into that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, why would somebody not just go? What would be the reason somebody wouldn't go after a portfolio loan if it's 80% based on, the property rather than your income or credit qualifications? What would be the downside, or what would be the reason why somebody wouldn't 100% go towards a portfolio loan if they're getting started and they're not in the lane that they're the strongest borrower as of yet, but they got a good deal on
the main reason most people do it for the residential loans is because they're 30-year fixed, and these commercial loans usually are 5, 7, or 10-year terms, meaning the borrower will have to refinance or pay it off in that 5, 7, 10-year period. Sometimes 15 if you're lucky. So that was one downside of the commercial side of the money portfolio. And the other downsides are, I'd say, the terms. So full recourse, meaning, you have to guarantee the loan personally. And they're just, the notes aren't standardized. So the agreement written, the promissory note isn't written in the favor of the borrower. The banks can put whatever they want because you're considered a commercial loan. You're sophisticated. You should be able to read it and know what you're signing up for. So there's a little bit more, I guess, homework or due diligence you got to do when you're doing commercial or portfolio loans, as opposed to the residential loans. They're boilerplate templates written by Fannie, and anybody can download a blank copy of the mortgage note or deed and look it over before they even sign one, because we all use the standardized templates for those.
Thinking about how investors think, because they're all cheapos, cheap asses. I love you guys, but you guys are definitely nickel and dime cheap asses. Hey, that's the way it goes. I get it. But what would be the down payment, the equity requirement? Is there a difference between conventional and a portfolio loan from that standpoint?
Yeah. There is. Conventional for one unit properties is as low as 15%. So it is lower. Most portfolio banks will want anywhere from 20 to 25 generally. So
just that right there, that fact alone right there might push people one way or another, and they just have to deal with the terms and the rates based on how much money they have, right?
Correct. I mean, we're assuming the investor in this hypothetical doesn't live in the property, right, Julie?
Right. Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So that is correct. However, there are pros of the portfolio money. You can cross collateralize, meaning you can add other properties into the loan so you can get the value to work, so you can get the money you need. You can qualify based on debt coverage, which is much easier to qualify on if you have tenants, as opposed to debt to income. You fund in LLCs and entities, so you don't have to have it in your personal name, which is important to some people. What I like is they're much less paperwork to close than a regular residential loan. Depending on what your taxes look like, what your income looks like on your property, you may want to do one versus the other, and rate may not be the only determinant.
Right. So just like you guys are doing for all you investors listening out there, all the savvy investors, I am sure, or here's your tip if you're not doing this, is when you have a deal analyzer on your property, right? And maybe if you also are doing the right thing, you're going to have more than one exit strategy, guys, for every deal that you're looking at, every investment opportunity that you're looking at. So you're lining up whether that's going to be a flip or a buy and hold, or if there's seller financing available, or if you're going to have, whatever the scenario might be, house hack, whatever the scenarios are that you're looking at as your investment play and your exit strategy, you definitely need to have then another, we'll say loan analyzer, where you're applying which loans are available to you and running your deal through those and see what pops out. Wouldn't you say, Albert, that might be a good idea?
Yeah. I mean, I analyze it just like I think larger investors would. I stress test my my investments as well. So I'll basically run an analyzer with a higher rate, for instance, or I'll assume more vacancy, or I'll assume more repairs, and I'll play around with numbers and see how much I can stress it before it doesn't make any more money. Not that I'm such doom and doom, but I want to know what my worst downsides are. Use portfolio money as well. So if it's due in 5 years, I want to know worst case my value will be. So I'll assume a lower value. Can I refinance out of it? Can I sell it? Let's assume a low selling price because we don't know what the economy will be in 5 years. So I'll do all these assumptions, and if I'm still happy with where where I bought and where the deal is, I'll still buy it.
Let me ask you a question. So right now we're in May of 2018. We're in a super hot, low inventory market with still, really low interest rates available at this point, even though they're on the rise. Do you, for yourself, like we said, always consider the downsides and project out, especially if you're looking at a 5-year term, you're going to be forced to do something, in those 5 years at that end of the term there. Do you have any feeling, or do you have a rule for yourself at this point on a maximum loan to value that you will put on a property, even if you could squeeze your required equity down? Would you be cautious with this at this point, just in case we have a correction, considering, especially if you're maybe if you have a residential loan on there and you're getting a 30-year term, you can write it out, right? But if you are in a portfolio loan situation, you damn well better be planning for a potential correction to happen. Do you have any rules for yourself on maximum loan to value on portfolio loans that you, regardless if you could, put less equity down or not, lower down, do you max it out at a certain percent for yourself?
I think maybe with lines of credit, I don't like to max out with actual money, meaning taking the money out and just sit around on my account earning nothing. So I do subscribe to and that's another topic, but a lot of people call it velocity banking or paycheck parking strategy, where you're systematically putting all your money to your line of credit beyond your, of course, emergency fund in cash. So I guess that's a top personal finance. I like that because I'm saving interest daily. And but in terms of your question about the properties, yeah, I do like to stay lower leverage, but for me, it focuses mainly, what determines that is it focuses on the cash flow. I want to obtain a certain cash flow because that is what holds property through downturns, not the value. Values could be great, because I have stories on podcasts where people in Florida had 50% loan to value and they lost houses because rents went way down, and suddenly developers were renting out properties, competing with other landlords, and then rents crashed. And people, they were 50% loan to value, but now since values crashed, they were 100% loan to value, and they had no tenant, so they couldn't hold property because they couldn't pay all the mortgages. It was at the end of the day, it was all about cash flow. So that's what I'm focused on mainly, is the difference between the money coming in and the money going out. So for me, it's really simple scenario. Just keep the money going in as possible and keep it going out as low as possible. So paying is an advantage too. It can.
Did you say pay? What did you say that on that last part? It clicked out on me.
Paying slower.
Down?
Paying slower. So I guess in the business world, and if a contractor is willing to accept net 30 at 60 payment in 30 or 60 days, I would prefer to pay it slower and then have the money coming in. They come in every month, for instance, rents. So I try to pay money going out expensive slower and get the rents faster if I can. An example would be Airbnb, or just giving the tenants incentives to pay quicker or on time.
Right.
Yeah.
I hear you.
No, yeah.
All good stuff. We're getting a little long on time here. We don't want to keep you in a parking lot too long, but I do have curiosity for myself, and so I'm being selfish. What do you think of short-term rentals as a business model for investors? And then I'll let you go.
I have actually a few clients that do it as a business. They lease and then sublease out via Airbnb or VRBO and other sites. I do help them with that. I like the model because you own nothing and rent everything. I mean, some investors buy and then it up and rent it out, so they own the property as well. I've seen different models where they lease and sub. It's a really viable
Are you saying
business.
like you do a lease option and then you sublease it out as Airbnb?
Yeah, like a lease and then they sublease. Yeah.
Oh, I like it.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, that's another topic for another day, guys. There's a little tidbit of maybe something we'll do a follow-up on. But is there any regulation out there in regards to the short term? Isn't there like a hotel tax or anything like that? What is it? Is there some extra cost?
Every city will vary. So I guess, upon each person's city and area where they're looking to do a short-term rental strategy. But from the lending end, I'll talk on that so that every one of the listeners will get an idea of how that income is calculated. We can only use short-term rental income if it's on the tax returns for 2 years. There are ways to use it still from a qualification standpoint in short qualifications, so it could be 1 year or whatnot. But it does have to be filed. So it's not like a rental agreement. You can use the income right away. So for people out looking to do short-term, keep in mind that we may be calculating that with no income to help offset for a while until it returns. So hopefully they can qualify without that short-term rental income.
Well, maybe we're going to have to twist your arm to come to Seattle Investors Club and give a presentation about all these great things. And is that included as a topic as well? Or maybe have you back on the podcast? And we like to go nitty gritty on this stuff here on our podcast here at the Nuts and Bolts of Real Estate Investing. So I myself am like, this has been a great, I love, this side and diving deep on the lending side. We've only scratched the surface today on stuff that you guys should be thinking about, but hopefully Albert's going to help and team up with me and start talking more about how people getting started should be paying more attention to passive income and understanding lending from the start and making lending and understanding debt as big of a conversation as how to rehab a house. I think it's even more important, in my opinion. So, Albert, thank you so much for, coming on and joining us today. And we look forward to hearing a lot more from you in the future as one of our go-to guys. How can people reach you, Albert, if they need some help with loans and getting qualified or having questions? And, I highly recommend you guys give Albert a call and reach out and get on that sooner rather than later. I actually think, we tell investors, getting sidetracked here, but that you should all get your hard money file set up from the beginning. You should all get qualified with a hard money lender. For God's sakes, you should also, as importantly, and I think even pushing more importantly these days, is to make sure you, from the start, establish a relationship with a lender that can help you consider the different conventional and portfolio and passive income loans and different loan strategies that you can use, not only in general, but for your particular situation. It's no different than having an attorney on your team or your CPA on your team. So you guys should all put Albert on your team. There you go. How can they contact you, Albert?
Yeah, they can give me a call. My number is 206-899-1900. And my email is Albert, Albert, at albertbui.com. So it's albertbui.com. And you brought up a good point, Julie. Thanks for having me on. And what I think you brought out that was a good point was that they should always have a backup option, because there's so often that I find flips gone wrong or budget's gone over, and people scramble at the last minute after maxing out all their credit cards at Home Depot and wherever else to try to refinance the flip into a house they're living in or as a rental, because the flip can't make enough profit now because of all the overruns or the delays and the extra points to extend their hard money loan. So all of that could have been resolved if they just figured out a backup strategy up front, just in case, because I would have told them how to manage their credit to instantly refinance out of that, or the highest they could go in cost before it's probably not going to work out on a loan end or selling end anymore. So they know before going in how to get out multiple ways. So
that's right. Have the end in mind when you get started.
Yeah,
know all your options. Not only that, you might have decided from the start. My point also is you guys might have decided from the start that you don't need to flip it, that there's a better way for you to make more money. I get that everybody needs to make some sort of fees and income and stuff like that to pay bills and pile up a little bit of cash. But, I think it's something that I'm going to be talking a lot about going forward here is, like I said, getting Albert on your team. And, do you do lending in other states, Albert? Is it Washington and California?
Yeah, I do lend in other states. Licensed in Texas, Tennessee, Washington, and California.
Wow.
However, through the mortgage company I'm at, we can lend in other states as well through our other licensed agents. So, I've done them everywhere from Raleigh, North Carolina to Minneapolis, all the way down to Texas, so they're back to Washington, California. So
awesome. Awesome. We don't know when our podcast here is reaching people out there in podcast land from anywhere. So, if you guys like what Albert had to say today and you're off in, whatever state that you're in, worth a call, because I'm telling you, hands down, this guy knows what he's talking about. And is one of I'll say, Albert, I'll just say it here publicly with everybody listening. You're getting my favorite guy of the year award right now, aside from Joe.
Awesome.
I am super impressed with you, man, and I look forward to developing a growing relationship with you as we kick off further down this year and to all the years that come. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks, Julie.
Right. Joe, what else do we got here? You want to wrap us up? And
Yeah. So if you guys love this podcast, like I did, we'd love to have an iTunes review. You can head over to seattleinvestorsclub.com/iTunes and review the podcast. That always helps us to get the podcast out to more people. And if you want to check out the show notes of anything that we've talked about today, you can do so at seattleinvestorsclub.com/33. That's seattleinvestorsclub.com/33. All right, Albert, thanks so much. And Julie, awesome job. I will talk to you guys later.
Awesome stuff,
Thanks,
guys. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Seattle Investors Club podcast. If you have questions that you'd like to have answered on the show, shoot us an email at info@seattleinvestorsclub.com. Now go out, take that action, and build that real estate business. Thanks for listening.